The evening begins in a pristine dining hall, the kind of place that gleams with understated Welth marble floors, gold-trimmed dinnerware, and a chandelier that casts a warm but heavy glow over the table. Ava Miller sits at one end, her posture perfect but her mind distracted. She has always been a dutiful daughter, the kind who balances family expectations with her own ambitions, but tonight feels strange even before the first glass is raised. Her parents, smiling with a little too much excitement, exchange looks that make her uneasy. As courses are served and small talk fades, her father clears his throat and announces with proud finality that Ava's marriage has been arranged to Daniel Carter, the eldest son of the Carter family, a powerful name in both finance and influence. The room fills with polite applause and congratulatory murmurs, but Ava hears nothing. Her chest tightens, her fork clinks against the plate she can no longer lift, and her world narrows to the sound of her own heartbeat. She hadn't expected this. In fact, she had been so focused on finishing law school, chasing internships, and carving a future that was hers alone that the idea of marriage, especially an arranged one, feels like an ambush. All at once, she realizes the rug has been pulled from beneath her, and everyone else seems to be standing firmly on the ground while she's falling through. In the awkward silence that follows the announcement, Ava forces herself to smile, her lips trembling at the edges, but her mind is already racing. She excuses herself under the pretense of needing air and pulls her mother aside, her voice urgent but low enough not to disturb the carefully curated harmony of the evening. "I thought you wanted me to choose my own life," she whispers, and in that moment, her words carry years of unspoken yearning. Ava had believed naively, perhaps, that her late-night study sessions, her relentless pursuit of independence, and her mother's occasional nods of encouragement meant that she would be allowed to steer her own path. Her mother's eyes, however, are cool and unyielding. "This is the best choice for all of us," she replies, her tone carrying the weight of finality, of deals struck and alliances made long before Ava had a chance to protest. The statement is less about Ava's happiness and more about the family's survival, a truth that burns deeper than any insult. For Ava, the confrontation is a shattering revelation. Her family's love is conditional, tethered to her obedience. Her heart aches with the betrayal of realizing that her own desires rank far below the family's ambition. The argument, though brief, becomes the fracture point of the evening. Ava returns to the table with her composure barely intact, but inside she feels as though something vital has cracked her sense of belonging within her own family. Back at the table, Ava notices Daniel Carter for the first time beyond the surface. He sits with his back straight, his expression polite, but there is a subtle tightness in his jaw, a stiffness in the way he raises his glass. When the family's toast, his eyes flicker toward her, and in that fleeting glance, Ava sees something familiar: reluctance. Later, when the conversation shifts and no one is watching too closely, Daniel leans slightly toward her, his voice pitched low, just for her ears. "Looks like we're stuck in the same trap," he murmurs. The words hit her like a strange comfort, bitter but honest, like someone finally acknowledging the truth aloud. He doesn't appear thrilled either. In his eyes, Ava reads quiet defiance, a man bound by duty but not without resentment. Their reluctant bond is forged not through romance but through mutual entrapment, and that subtle understanding becomes a lifeline in a suffocating evening. Hours later, alone in her room, Ava opens her worn leather journal, the one place where she allows herself to be unfiltered. Her hand trembles slightly as she writes, "This isn't love. This is a contract. But maybe I can survive it." The ink bleeds into the page, heavy with resignation but not yet despair. That final sentence is less a declaration and more a survival strategy, a fragile vow to herself. She feels trapped but not broken. And within that private admission, the story's emotional hook crystallizes. Ava is caught between duty and desire. Forced into a marriage neither she nor her fiancé wants, but already showing hints of the resilience that will define her journey, Ava Miller grew up in a household where control disguised itself as care. Her parents provided for her, ensured she attended good schools, and praised her accomplishments, but always with invisible strings attached. Every decision, from what she studied to who she spent time with, was measured against the family's reputation and security. Her father, burdened with years of hidden debts and risky business ventures, saw her not only as his daughter, but as his insurance policy. Marriage to Daniel Carter represented stability, the kind of alliance that could wipe away financial worries and restore his pride. For Ava, though, this arrangement felt like betrayal. She had spent years imagining her future in law, particularly as an advocate for women who found themselves trapped in marriages that suffocated them, the very scenario she now faced. Her dream wasn't just a career path. It was a rebellion against the invisible chains her family tried to wrap around her. She studied late into the night, found solace in casebooks and lectures, and told herself that freedom was possible if she worked hard enough. Yet even with her ambitions, she carried a loneliness that she rarely admitted, a sense that no matter how intelligent or determined she was always a pawn in someone else's game. Her family's announcement only sharpened that fear, turning her dreams into fragile glass that could shatter at any moment. Daniel Carter's upbringing couldn't have been more different in material comfort, but strikingly similar in emotional isolation. Born into wealth, he grew up in houses so large they echoed with silence, filled with luxury but void of warmth. His parents were consumed by appearances and status, every decision dictated by how it would reflect on the Carter name. Daniel, expected to follow in his father's footsteps, managed a wing of the family's company, but the work never stirred his soul. What he wanted, quietly and desperately, was to open an art studio. As a boy, he had sketched on the edges of notebooks, and as a teenager, he had filled entire canvases with the colors of feelings he couldn't express aloud. But each time he hinted at this dream, his parents dismissed it as frivolous, insisting that art was for hobbies, not for heirs. Their cold indifference had already cost him once years earlier, when a woman he loved walked away because his parents disapproved. That heartbreak carved into him the cruel truth. In his world, love was conditional, and choices were dictated by legacy, not desire. On the outside, Daniel seemed polished, composed, and perfectly molded for the role he had been assigned. Inside, he carried the weight of suppressed passion and unhealed wounds, living in a world where he was surrounded by everything but the one thing he craved most: genuine connection. When Ava and Daniel first encountered each other at the engagement dinner, their initial impressions were tinted by resentment. Ava, still reeling from the ambush of her parents' announcement, looked at Daniel and saw arrogance in the way he carried himself, chin lifted, posture sharp, eyes that seemed to scan the room with cool detachment. To her, he represented the very system she wanted to escape, privileged, untouchable, yet complicit in the prison she was being forced into. Daniel, on the other hand, noticed Ava's quiet refusal to smile, her deliberate coolness, and mistook it for stubbornness. He saw a woman unwilling to bend, a mirror of his own resistance, though he didn't recognize it yet as something he could admire. Both felt trapped, pawns in a game orchestrated by their parents. Yet in their defiance, a strange current flickered between them. Daniel couldn't help but respect the way Ava's eyes hardened when her father spoke of security, as if she was silently rebelling even in stillness. And Ava, despite herself, noticed the quick flash of honesty in Daniel's whispered words. "Looks like we're stuck in the same trap." Their first impressions were laced with annoyance and misunderstanding. But beneath it lay something far more dangerous: recognition. Both were lonely, both were fighting battles they couldn't voice, and both carried wounds that only someone equally trapped might understand. That fragile, unspoken connection promised tension, conflict, and perhaps a sliver of hope that neither dared to admit. Wedding was everything their families wanted and nothing Ava or Daniel had hoped for. The church was decorated with white roses and crystal chandeliers, the aisle lined with gold-trimmed candles that glittered like a fairy tale. Yet to Ava, it felt like walking into a cage. Her gown, though beautiful, weighed heavy on her shoulders. Every lace detail felt like another chain binding her. As she walked down the aisle, her friends seated in the pews exchanged worried glances. One of them leaned in to whisper, "She looks like a prisoner," unaware that Daniel, standing at the altar, overheard the comment. His jaw tightened, his hand curling into a fist at his side, not because he disagreed, but because the words mirrored his own thoughts. The vows were spoken, rings exchanged, and cameras flashed, but the entire ceremony carried a hollow ring. Ava's parents smiled with triumphant pride, Daniel's with icy approval, and the guests applauded politely. But beneath the lavish surface, both bride and groom knew they were participants in a carefully staged performance. The kiss that sealed the marriage was quick and stiff, a transaction rather than an act of love. For Ava, the moment felt like her independence had been stripped away in front of an audience. For Daniel, it was the bitter confirmation that his life was not his own. That evening, in the grand bedroom that was meant to be their new beginning, Ava and Daniel sat across from each other in awkward silence. The silence stretched until Daniel finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "We don't have to pretend. Let's just survive this." Ava exhaled, relief flickering across her face, and nodded. They agreed to coexist without illusions, no forced intimacy, no fake smiles. When they finally lay down in bed, they turned their backs to one another, each retreating into their own corner of the mattress. The physical distance between them was a quiet declaration. They may be married, but they were worlds apart. In the days that followed, the pressures from their families only tightened the noose. Ava's father, emboldened by the security of the marriage, urged her to quit law school. "It's time you focused on being a good wife," he said, dismissing her ambitions as distractions. The words cut deep, but Ava swallowed her protest, knowing open rebellion would only cause more damage. Meanwhile, Daniel's parents insisted they host business dinners, parading Ava as a symbol of his perfect union. They treated her less like a person and more like a polished accessory, a trophy wife meant to impress investors. For both Ava and Daniel, the marriage quickly became not just a private cage, but a public performance. It was during one of those glittering business dinners, seated at a long table surrounded by crystal glasses and forced laughter, that Ava's breaking point came. Her father, emboldened by wine and pride, sneered when she mentioned her law school coursework. "Law is wasted on women," he said with a smirk. The words hit Ava like a slap, and she felt tears sting her eyes. She tried to steady her breathing, to mask the tremor in her hands, but her silence betrayed her pain. The table hushed slightly, guests watching the tension unfold. To her surprise, it was Daniel who broke the silence. He set down his glass and spoke firmly, his voice carrying a quiet authority. "Actually, Ava's one of the smartest people I've ever met. If anyone can succeed in law, it's her." The room stilled, shocked by his open defiance, not only of Ava's father, but of the very culture of control they were all complicit in. Ava's eyes widened, startled not just by his defense, but by the sincerity behind it. In that moment, the carefully constructed facade cracked, revealing a glimpse of Daniel's humanity. He wasn't just the polished heir or the reluctant groom. He was someone capable of empathy, of recognizing her worth even when others dismissed it. For Ava, the moment planted the faintest seed of trust. For Daniel, it was the first time he acted not for his parents' approval, but for his own sense of justice. Though the dinner carried on, something had shifted irreversibly between them. The early months of marriage are a battlefield for Ava and Daniel. Every interaction seems to spark an argument, their words sharp with resentment. Ava accuses Daniel of being complicit in their parents' control, of never fighting back. Daniel fires back that Ava is naive, that her stubborn idealism will only destroy her if she doesn't learn how to play the game. Their voices echo through the vast house, each argument ending with slammed doors and aching silences. Yet, somewhere in the storm, cracks begin to show, not of weakness, but of truth. One evening, during one of her restless walks through their home, Ava stumbles upon a leather-bound sketchbook left carelessly on Daniel's desk. Curious, she flips it open and finds pages upon pages of sketches and paintings, portraits, cityscapes, abstract swirls of color. They are raw, emotional, utterly unlike the polished, distant man she thought she knew. For the first time, she glimpses his inner world, a place of yearning, pain, and beauty that his family would never approve of. When Daniel finds her holding the sketchbook, his face flushes with vulnerability. He expects mockery, but Ava's voice is soft. "You're an artist." That moment shifts something between them. For the first time, Ava sees the man behind the armor, and Daniel realizes she might be the only one willing to see him for who he truly is. Just as Ava begins to see Daniel differently, her own world shatters again. She receives a letter in the mail, another rejection from a prestigious law fellowship. This time, though, it isn't because she lacked the credentials. She overhears a tense phone call and realizes her father had interfered, pulling strings to ensure she wouldn't be accepted. His reasoning is cruel but simple. If Ava succeeds, she will no longer need the marriage, and that threatens his carefully crafted arrangement. That night, Ava collapses in her study, tears soaking the rejection letter, her dreams slipping through her fingers. Daniel finds her like this, broken, defeated in a way he has never seen before. At first, he says nothing, unsure if his presence will be welcome. Then, quietly, he sits beside her and says, "Ripley, if they turned you away once, then make it impossible for them to do it again. Don't let him win." His words are not dramatic or flowery, but steady, almost defiant on her behalf. Ava looks at him through her tears, startled by his quiet conviction. This is not the cold husband who once stood across from her like a stranger. It is someone who sees her pain and refuses to let her surrender to it. It's in this moment that the balance shifts. Where before they were adversaries locked in a war of wills, now Daniel becomes her reluctant ally. From that night onward, something begins to change in their marriage. The sharp edges of hostility soften, replaced by small but meaningful gestures. Daniel starts making Ava tea when she stays up late studying, leaving the cup by her side without a word. Ava, in turn, notices the way he fumbles with his tie before important meetings and quietly steps in to fix it, her fingers brushing against his collar in a gesture that feels more intimate than either of them is ready to admit. The house, once filled with cold silences, begins to carry a fragile warmth. They are no longer strangers bound by duty, but two people cautiously stepping into something resembling companionship. Yet, just as the fragile thread of connection begins to form, it's tested. Ethan, Ava's old friend from law school, confesses one evening that he has always loved her. He pleads with her to leave Daniel, insisting she deserves freedom, that her marriage is a gilded cage. Ethan represents everything Ava once dreamed of: independence, choice, love untainted by duty. His confession rattles her, stirring old questions. Is she falling into the very trap she swore to resist? Or has her heart, against her will, begun to shift toward Daniel? The doubt gnaws at her, tearing open the conflict between who she thought she was and who she is becoming. Ava finds herself standing at an emotional crossroads. torn between the familiar promise of freedom Ethan offers and the unexpected warmth growing with the man she once thought she could never love. The discovery comes like a knife to Ava's chest. One evening, while sifting through documents in her father's study, she stumbles upon a set of legal contracts neatly tucked away in a folder stamped with both the Miller and Carter family seals. At first, she skims with confusion, but as the words unravel, her hands begin to tremble. The contracts explicitly bind her inheritance, future career opportunities, and even her pending law degree sponsorship to the Carter family business. In essence, her father has not only dictated her marriage, but also shackled her entire future to Daniel's world, ensuring she could never escape. Rage and grief flood her at once. The betrayal is deeper than she ever imagined, not just a daughter forced into an unwanted union, but a commodity traded, her autonomy reduced to a bargaining chip. She feels suffocated, the air stolen from her lungs as the reality sinks in. Everything she had fought for her independence, her dreams, has been bartered away without her consent. Bursting into the family's dining room where her father and mother sit, she throws the papers on the table, her voice trembling before it breaks into a scream. "You didn't marry me off. You sold me." The words G heavy in the air, louder than any chandelier crash, and her father's silence confirms what she already knows. The confrontation ignites like wildfire. Ava's father attempts to defend his actions with cold logic, claiming it was all for security, her protection, but Ava won't hear it. Years of suppressed rage pour out, her voice shaking with fury as she names every betrayal, every broken promise, every moment he placed family reputation above her happiness. Daniel, standing silently until now, feels the fire rising in his own chest. Across town in his parents' study, the scene is mirrored when he finally explodes at them. "You control everything," he says, his tone like steel. "But you don't own us," his mother sneers, accusing him of weakness, of risking everything for a woman who will never understand their world. His father, cold and calculating, insists that sacrifices must be made for legacy. But Daniel no longer bows to that logic. He sees Ava's face in his mind, the betrayal etched into her features, and realizes he can no longer play the role of obedient son. For the first time in his life, he stands not as an heir, but as a man determined to protect someone else's freedom, even if it means dismantling his own. The stage is set for the collision of both families, where duty, legacy, and love finally clash in one irreversible moment. The families gather, tension thick as smoke. At the head of the table lies the contract, the symbol of control binding Ava's life to the Carter empire. Everyone expects Daniel to enforce it, to remind Ava of her place, but instead, he takes the papers in his hands. With deliberate calm, he tears them in half, the sound of ripping pages echoing like thunder in the silent room. Gasps fill the air, his parents outraged, her father pale with shock. Daniel turns to Ava, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "You deserve to choose. Even if that choice isn't me." The words break through Ava's fury, cutting deeper than any betrayal ever could, because they are not chains but liberation. For the first time, someone has fought not to control her, but to free her, even at the cost of his own wealth and power. Her vision blurs with tears as she realizes the enormity of what he's done. Daniel, the man she once thought arrogant and cold, has given up everything to prove that she is not property, not a pawn, but a person worth sacrificing for. The families argue, voices rising, but Ava hears nothing except the pounding of her own heart. In the wreckage of contracts and shattered legacies, a truth crystallizes. Daniel doesn't just care for her. He loves her not as an obligation, not as a trophy, but as herself. The emotional explosion is not loud, but quiet, intimate, her trembling hand reaching for his across the table. It is the moment where everything shifts, not because control was seized, but because it was finally surrendered. For the first time in years, Ava feels her future is hers to claim. With trembling hands but renewed determination, she reapplies for the law fellowship that had once been taken from her. This time, she writes her application with unflinching honesty, detailing her passion for helping women escape controlling marriages and reclaim their voices. Weeks later, when the acceptance letter arrives, Ava holds it like a sacred victory. It is not just an academic achievement, it is proof that her dreams are no longer dictated by her father's bargains. She takes the letter to her family home, facing her father directly in the study where she once discovered her betrayal. The air is heavy, but her voice is steady as she lays the paper on his desk. I am not your bargaining chip. I am your daughter. Start acting like it. The words strike harder than any scream, her calm defiance piercing through the armor of his authority. For the first time, her father cannot meet her eyes. Ava walks away, not waiting for his approval because she no longer needs it. Her power is not borrowed from contracts or names. It is hers, earned and uncheckable. Meanwhile, Daniel makes his own quiet rebellion. With the inheritance cut off and his family's influence severed, he turns to the one thing that has always given him life art. Using his personal savings, he rents a small but bright studio in the city, its white walls waiting to be filled with color. He paints for hours, pieces that bleed with both pain and hope, and soon the studio becomes his gallery. It isn't lavish, not compared to the opulent halls he once knew, but it is his authentic, untainted, a reflection of who he truly is. For the first time, Daniel lives simply but freely, unburdened by the suffocating expectations of his parents. When visitors come to see his work, they don't see the Carter heir. They see an artist. Standing in his gallery on opening night, Daniel feels lighter, as though the chains of legacy have finally broken. He is no longer living for appearances, but for himself, and that shift allows him to breathe in a way he never could before. His choice is not grand or dramatic, but it is revolutionary, a life defined by his own hands, his own vision, his own heart. Their relationship evolves not with dramatic declarations, but with small, meaningful steps. Ava, now accepted into her fellowship, moves into her own apartment, a modest space filled with books, case files, and sunlight streaming through wide windows. She doesn't need Daniel to rescue her. She has rescued herself. But one morning, as she studies at her kitchen table, there is a knock at the door. Daniel stands there, holding 2 cups of coffee, his expression nervous but hopeful. No pressure, he says softly, offering the cup. Just use. The simplicity of the gesture speaks louder than any promise. They no longer exist as strangers forced into a contract, nor as enemies chained by family duty. Instead, they begin again, cautiously but authentically, as equals. Some days they laugh over shared meals. Other days they sit in silence, comfortable in each other's company. The warmth that once flickered now grows steadily, not rushed, not forced. Ava sees in Daniel not the man she was trapped with, but the man who chose her freedom over his wealth. Daniel sees in Ava not the woman forced upon him, but the woman strong enough to reclaim her life. Together, they rebuild, not out of obligation, but choice. And that choice makes all the difference. Months later, Ava steps into Daniel's gallery, this time not as a woman dragged into his world, but as someone who walks there by her own choice. The exhibit hums with soft conversation and the rustle of visitors admiring the paintings, but all Ava hears is the thrum of her own heartbeat. She has just won her first court case, defending a woman whose circumstances echoed Ava's own past, trapped, silenced, desperate for a way out. Standing in the courtroom that day, Ava realized she wasn't just practicing law, she was living her purpose. That victory radiates from her now as she moves through the gallery, glowing with pride and freedom. When she reaches Daniel, she notices how he looks at her, not as a possession or an accessory, but as an equal, a partner. She glances down at her hand and slips off the ornate wedding ring her parents had once forced upon her, the one that symbolized chains disguised as tradition. In its place, she slides on a new, simple silver band, unadorned but deeply meaningful. This ring was chosen together, not imposed, a quiet symbol of their journey from obligation to love. The gesture is small, but in that moment, Ava feels the full weight of transformation. The woman who once stood like a prisoner at her own wedding now stands free, radiant and unafraid. The room quiets as Ava steps closer to Daniel, her hand now bearing the band they had chosen together one rainy afternoon in a tiny shop tucked away on a side street. It wasn't flashy, wasn't expensive, but it was theirs, purchased not to impress anyone else, but to remind them of what they had built. She lifts her hand, letting Daniel see the simple ring catching the gallery lights. His breath hitches, the tiniest smile tugging at the corners of his mouth, and in his eyes, Ava sees both recognition and relief. They don't need grand speeches. The exchange of rings speaks for them. For Ava, the act is not just about love, it's about reclaiming her story, rewriting it with her own hand. For Daniel, it is the confirmation that he has not only freed himself from his parents' grip, but has earned something far more valuable, a love built on truth, sacrifice, and choice. They stand for a moment in stillness, surrounded by people yet completely alone in their quiet orbit. Ava's fingers brush against Daniel's, and the simple touch feels like a vow more binding than any contract their families ever drafted. No chains, no negotiations. Just them. As the evening winds down, Daniel leads Ava toward the centerpiece of his exhibit, a large canvas bathed in vibrant strokes of color. The painting depicts an open road stretching endlessly into the horizon, framed by wild skies and wide fields limitless, unconfined. Standing before it, Ava feels her chest swell. It is more than just a painting. It is a map of the life they have chosen, unpredictable but theirs. Daniel takes her hand gently, their fingers intertwining as though they were always meant to fit. In that quiet, Ava's voice carries softly, her words narrating the truth of their journey. What began as duty became choice. What began as chains became freedom. And what began as strangers became love. Her voice trembles, not from uncertainty, but from the gravity of finally arriving where she belongs. Daniel squeezes her hand, his eyes lingering on hers before drifting back to the open road on the canvas. The gallery lights reflect against the painting, casting a warm glow that envelopes them both. To the world, it is art. To them, it is a promise. In that closing image, two people once bound by chains, now standing, free before the road ahead, the story finds its quiet but powerful end. Not in spectacle, but in choice. Not in obligation, but in love.